So I'm Paul Foster from Salt, Michelin-Starred Restaurant and Cookery School in Stratford-upon-Avon. I've worked all over the world around for some of the best chefs, including Thomas Keller, Raymond Blanc and Sat Baines. My food philosophy is all about purity of flavour, getting the best ingredients, treating them with respect and producing amazing food. So I've collaborated with Banquist to create this menu for you. Starting with Roscoff onions, slowly confit, beer pickled onions and whipped goat's curd. Then truffled gnocchi, confit sprouts, kale and a parsnip puree. And then finishing it off with a really decadent Tunworth cheesecake, shortbread crumb and quince puree. And we've paired that with a dolcetto d'alba. So in your Banquist hamper, you've got a lovely selection of ingredients to produce your 3-course vegetarian meal. We're starting with some beautifully confit Roscoff onions with some thyme, garlic, butter, and then we're going to pickle some as well in this beer pickling liquor, which is made for you. So there's good quality bitter in there, white wine vinegar, brown sugar, thyme, juniper berries, so loads of depth of flavour. It's going to be finished with some goat's curd. We're just adding a little bit of cream to and whipping it very gently, and finish with some watercress. In the main course, we're going to make a very simple gnocchi, enhance it with a little bit of truffle. You'll be getting a teaspoon, just enough for the recipe. Some confit sprouts, a really silky parsnip puree, and finish with some kale. And then onto dessert, got a beautiful, delicate, really smooth Tunworth cheesecake. So this is half Tunworth, half mascarpone. The Tunworth brings a lovely flavour because it's English version of camembert. Finish with a quince puree and a really crunchy shortbread crumb. So we've supplied most of the ingredients for you. You just need a few store cupboard ingredients. So we've got some vegetable oil, or you can use sunflower oil, some good salted butter, salt and pepper, some plain flour, and then some eggs as well. And then for equipment, nothing specialist. So we need a blender that you can make a nice silky puree with, something to drain some vegetables with, frying pan, some saucepans, a mixing bowl for the gnocchi, and a whisk and some kitchen knives. So let's get on with the prep. So for this first part, you're obviously going to need a peeler. So I'm going to peel these potatoes. We're using Maris Piper, really good all-rounder, perfect for this kind of dish because you want a nice dry potato. If you use something like a baking potato, it's too wet, too high a water content, and your gnocchi is just not going to be firm. Peel it all, make sure there's no eyes in there. So my philosophy of food is all about using the best ingredients and not manipulating them, not messing about with them too much, just making sure the natural quality shines through. It's called purity of flavour. We are nothing without the best suppliers and the best producers. So then the potatoes, we're just going to cut into even sized pieces. Make sure they're not too misshaped, because what's going to happen, some are going to overcook and some are going to undercook. You want them all to be cooked at the same time. So the water's already started off, so it's nice and warm. Just carefully add the potatoes. It's already salted as well, this water. So really important we don't boil this rapidly. So we just want to cook it gently until the potato is just tender. If you overcook it, it's going to absorb too much water and then be really wet. So now for the parsnip puree. I've already got a pan just warming up quite gently. Use a peeler. Easiest way to do this, go around the top in a circle, then straight down, and then just follow it around, turn it in your hand. So just going to top and tail these, so you don't want the dry bits on the ends. So we want the puree to cook evenly and nice and quickly, so it's really important to cut it nice and thin. So don't worry about the stalk in the middle, that's fine. Just
talk us through your knife technique here.
Okay. So using the claw motion to cut the vegetables, the thumb is well behind, the fingers are arched, and the knife is actually running against my middle finger. And then you notice my knife doesn't leave the board much. So the toe of the knife goes down, and you roll through with the heel. And as you get more experience with that, that's when you can cut it thinly, go a little bit faster. It's even and your fingers are safe. When you get to the end, if it's a little bit wobbly, lay it down on the flatter side so it's a little bit safer, and do the same again so you can cut it evenly. So the pan's nice and warm. I'm just going to add a few knobs of butter to that. So it shouldn't start to brown straight away. Just let it melt, nice and foaming. Now I'm going to add the parsnip very carefully. And a good pinch of salt. So the salt's going to bring the moisture out, so it will sweat more. So it's not going to fry. We don't want any colour on this. Most of the cooking is going to be in the butter, and then we're going to finish it with a little bit of water, a little bit of cream. So for me, all purees you should use as wide a pan as possible. So you've got surface area. If it's too high, the vegetables piled up, the bottom's going to cook and the top isn't, so it's going to be uneven. So to get a better and quicker and more efficient result, pan selection is really important. So you can turn the heat up a little bit, just careful it doesn't start to catch and start to colour. This should take a maximum of 15 minutes to cook. So we can leave this cooking away gently whilst we get on with some more prep. So now we're going to get on with the pickled onions. Now this is something that features on my menu at Salt quite a lot. It's my favourite type. So I love pickled items, but this with the beer and the juniper and the brown sugar, it just has a lovely wintry, comforting kind of feel to it. I grew up in pubs, so any beer or malty flavours are really nostalgic for me. So just cut them into quarters once you've taken the tip off, and just peel off the excess skin. So potatoes have just come up to the boil. Just going to turn them down so they're at a gentle simmer, so the water's just moving. And just keeping an eye on my parsnips as well, making sure they're cooking without any colour. So this is quite a quick pickling recipe, something that we're going to bring up to the boil, and it's going to sit for a minimum of 10 minutes. If you want to leave it longer, that's totally fine, but all it needs is those 10 minutes just to get those lovely flavours through. So once they're into quarters, just break them down into the natural layers. It's just going to help the pickle penetrate through. Don't have to break it down completely. This is just going to help speed the process up. So the parsnips are just starting to soften now. There's a tiny bit of colour on the bottom of the pan, but that's just from the butter. The parsnips aren't really colouring. So now we can start adding a splash of water and then the cream just to finish the cooking off. So now just going to add a splash of water. And then some of the double cream. Then you just want to bring this up to the boil. If there's any parsnips on the side, just make sure they're pushed down, because otherwise they won't cook and they'll go through your puree and make it a little bit lumpy. Bring this up to the boil, then as soon as it's tender, it's ready to blend. So whilst we're waiting on the potatoes and the parsnips, we can do the beer pickled onions. So add the liquor to a hot pan and bring it straight back up to the boil. So the liquor's just coming up to the boil. It smells amazing. You get all that beer and those malty aromas. Onions go straight in. Just knock it around, let it come back up to heat again. Onions will come up to the boil now. Just going to turn them off. Let them finish in the liquor. So you can see the parsnips are just breaking up, nearly tender. You just want to make sure the core is tender. If the core's not, it's going to be lumpy, grainy. We want this puree to be really silky. These potatoes just on a gentle simmer. Just use a knife very carefully. Just check, you want them to go through and they're just breaking down. It's a crucial stage. You don't want to overcook them. I'd say they're about a minute off. So you can see the parsnips are all broken up now, so we know they're tender. Make sure that core is going to break down. If your spoon goes through it, then it's good to go. The sauce has thickened up slightly. That's going to help blend it and keep it sticky. It shouldn't be reduced down to nothing. If it starts to, just add a little bit more water. So I'm going to take this over to the blender now, season it up, get it nice and silky. Cool. So puree is ready to go in now, into the blender. If you're blending it while it's really hot like this, only ever fill the blender halfway up. Any more and then there's risk of creating a vacuum and having an accident. So do it in 2 parts if you need to. And if you are a little worried, just let it cool down a little. Keep it warm still. Blend it, it'll be much safer. So a little bit of seasoning now. I know it's going to need it. Parsnip does tend to take a lot of liquid when blending, so I may need to add a little bit of water to that. I'm not going to add any more cream because that adds fat and kind of disguises the flavour. I think it's got enough fat in there. So this looks really silky. Again, if it's hot, take a lot of care opening it up. If it's one of these that locks. So what you got is this beautiful silky puree. You don't even need to pass if you don't want to for a chinois. So for me that's going to take a little bit more salt. So that puree is ready now to decant and save till later. So just spread the puree out. Now parsnip has a tendency to form a skin as it dries quite quickly. So to make sure it doesn't do that, cling film over the top and just push it down so it's touching and there's no parsnip left. So what'll happen if it forms a skin and then when you reheat it later on, if you stir that into it, it's just going to get really lumpy. So that's good until we need it. So the potato's just cooked. Just check it with a knife. It's not falling apart and you can tell it's not overcooked because the water will be really gluey and starchy and white. So I'm just going to drain that off and then get it back into the pan and just dry it out in the pan to make sure there's no excess water. So the potatoes are just drained now. You can see they're not complete mush and really wet, so we know they're nicely cooked. But there is a little bit of excess water on the outside. So I'm just going to warm this very lightly in the pan on the stove just to dry it out a little bit. So just a really low heat, just stir them, make sure there's no water in the bottom. and just bring the potatoes together. If there's too much water in it, what's going to happen when you make your gnocchi, they're going to collapse when you cook them. You want them to stay nice and firm and have a lovely texture. If there's any little bad bits like that, or little brown bits that show up, just remove those. So now they look nice and light and fluffy. There's no excess moisture in there. They're ready to go. So I've got a nice big mixing bowl ready. So the potatoes straight to that. And we want to work this while it's still warm. Don't let it cool down. It's going to be really hard to work with. Now for this gnocchi, I'm keeping it quite rustic. So with a nice texture to it. So I'm just breaking it down with a fork. I don't want to mash it till it's really silky and smooth. This is just a slightly different way of doing a classic gnocchi. Got to make sure it's enough that it will bind together. Because if it is too coarse, then it's going to be crumbly. So run your fork through it and you'll see it is starting to come together. Now, so the recipe, 200 grams of the cooked potato, 50 grams of flour, too much flour, it's going to be too doughy and take too much cooking out. We want just enough just to help it hold together. And then 1 medium egg yolk. So just very carefully crack your egg over a bowl and then just move it from side to side to remove the white. Taking care not to break it at this stage, because it's going to make it messy and hard to work with. So yolk straight in. I'm going to season it now, so I'm mixing everything in together. That's sea salt in there, then the 1 teaspoon of the truffle paste. That's all you need. Truffle's such an amazing strong flavour. You don't need lots and lots of it. So now crack your yolk and just bring it together. You should smell the truffle straight away. Make sure it's well mixed in. I'm just going to let that cool just a little bit, just so it's easier to work with. So as long as you can handle it and it's not hot, it's ready to work with. You don't want to let it go completely cold. So start with a little bit of flour on your bench. Don't worry about doing too much. You don't want it sticking to the bench. It shouldn't be messy anyway. As long as you follow these simple steps, you should have a lovely dough. A little bit on your fingers. And bring it together. Knock off any excess. Just make it into little patties. Don't worry about the sizes not being even at this stage. That's not a problem. So now we've got our patties. Just make sure there's flour underneath them so they don't stick. Just very gently roll them out. Start with one hand and as it gets wider, go with 2. Just make it nice and even. About 1/2 inch, centimetre thick. And take a knife. We want to do one at a time just so they're not sticking. Take a knife and just very gently cut them on an angle like so. Then a touch of flour on your plate or tray just to stop them sticking again. I'm just going to put a little rivet in them. And put them straight on. Making sure there's a bit of space between them so they're not sticking together. And they're just easier to handle when it comes to cooking them later on. And then follow exactly the same process for the next ones. Just is let the potato dough do the work. Don't push down, don't force it. Just the natural rolling of it is gonna spread it out, and you're gonna get a nice sort of even feel to it. Don't worry if it breaks up a little bit, that's fine. So Brussels sprouts, lovely vegetable if treated properly. Just going to take off some of the outer leaves. Cut the end of the stalk off, making sure you keep it together, and then go straight in half. So I've been inspired by a lot of chefs throughout my career. Early on, I learned a huge amount from Le Manoir Saison with Raymond Blanc and Gary Jones. Just the passion and the quality of ingredients was what really inspired me in my younger years. And then working around the world and having experience at my mecca, which is the French Laundry, under Corey Lee and Thomas Keller, was just the real finishing school. So the sprouts are all cut up now. See, I've left the core part in, which is going to hold them together, because we're going to roast these and we want them to stay in half. So these don't take long to cook, so we're going to set them aside and finish them later, just before we cook the gnocchi. So that's the prep done, let's get on with the starter. So at this point, just preheat the oven at 160 degrees centigrade. So now for some Confit Roscoff onions. So get a pan warming up, moderate heat, a little bit of oil. So whilst we're waiting for that to come up, then it's the onion. Now protect this, we want to keep the skin on, so we're going to cook it with all the skin on. All we're doing is straight in half. No root off, no tail off, we'll do all that later, because we're actually going to cook this flat side here. So with this we've got some garlic, just going to cook with it with some butter. So classic aromats of garlic and thyme, which is just going to suck up all that flavour into the onions. So keep the skin on, just lightly crush, just to bring out all those oils. As soon as that's ready, we can go in the pan. So now the pan's nice and hot. Very carefully, use the towel, push the onion down. We're going to fry these quite hard, just develop the colour. Once we've got the colour we want, then we're going to add the butter and the thyme, and then turn it down, and that's when we're adding the flavour. So it's colour it, get that nice char, then we're going to slowly cook it in all that butter and aromats. So in total, it's about 3 or 4 minutes of pan work and then about 10 minutes in the oven. So taking a lot of care, just pick it up, see how the colours go in. You need a little bit more than that. It will look like it's starting to burn, but don't worry, that's where the flavour's coming from. So pushing it down as well, make sure you've got full contact. So that's the kind of colour I want, a lovely even char. So now, turn it down, moderate heat. Then we're going to add the butter. So stand back, very carefully add the butter. And let it foam, let it go a little bit brown, that lovely nutty brown colour, which brings that lovely flavour through. Now it's not too hot. Garlic in and thyme. You really don't want to burn those aromats. If you added the garlic and the thyme to the oil, it's going to burn and get bitter. What you should get is this lovely, lovely aroma coming through. Nice deep frying pan like this is going to be a bit safer, so you can roll it around, you can spoon it over if you need to. So add some fat to the top. This skin's going to protect the onion and stop it drying out. So once this is coloured and ready, it's going to go into preheated oven at 160 degrees for around 12 minutes. So we're using goat's curd for this dish instead of goat's cheese. It's a little more delicate. It's a nice lactic acid to it, and it's a lot softer. For me, it's much better for this dish because it's more acidic and it's much fresher. So just to soften it a little, got the goat's curd ready. I've just brought that up to room temperature. So add a little bit of cream and just whip that. Work it in slowly at first, just so you don't splash everywhere. And then whip. This is just going to lighten it up, make it lovely and silky and smooth. Tiny splash more. Knock it out of the whisk and bring it back together. You can see how lovely and delicate and smooth that is. You can set that aside as we're nearly ready to plate up. So just going to check the onions now, and you just want to feel slightly tender to touch. The one with the root on sometimes takes a little bit longer because that is a bit harder. But that's had 12 minutes and that's perfect to me. So just let the onions sit for a few minutes to cool down because they're going to be very hot, very hard to work with, just so you can handle them. You don't want to serve them red hot anyway, you just want them nice and warm. So when they're ready and they've cooled down a bit, just take them out, put them on the chopping board. You see the beautiful layers there, all the colour, the butter's sucked up in there. You know there's going to be loads of flavour. So it's where we just want to remove the skin, and then the one outside layer which does tend to be a bit tough. Then what you're left with is a beautiful delicate onion. And then I'll just ever so carefully slice that bit of tail off. That's one ready to go. Then the root one just takes a little bit more work because obviously it doesn't come off as easy. Just very carefully slice it off. Going to season with a little bit of sea salt. Then we're going to start to plate. So goat's curd first. So just want it to look nice and natural. So on the side of the plate, stand up nice and proud. Can be quite generous with this. Gives it that lovely creamy element. So then the onions. Just separate them out. So we're almost making a bit of a salad. Then a little tip for these beer pickled onions. Take them out, and there's a little membrane. Just run your finger, pull it off. That's not very nice to digest. So it's worth just a little chefy tip. Just take them off beforehand. It's going to be much nicer to eat. So they aren't really acidic like a normal pickled onion. So you can add quite a few to this dish. Slice them up, just so they're a little bit easier to eat and look a little bit more delicate. And just arrange. I like to spoon a little bit of the liquor. This liquor tastes amazing. You don't want to waste it. Spoon a little bit on the plate. And let it cut through that goat's curd, the creaminess, and then through the fatty, buttery onions. Then to finish it off, some lovely fresh watercress. Watercress and onion and goat's curd is a really good combination. So that pepperiness from the leaves. So you want to be quite generous with it. So you're making like a nice salad here. It's like a warm, wintry or autumnal salad. So here's the first course. Confit Roscoff onions, beer pickled onions, whipped goat's curd, and some lovely fresh peppery watercress. I hope you enjoyed that starter. Now it's time to get the main course ready. So I've decided to finish this dish with kale. Now kale is a bit underrated. It's a healthy food, so it can get a bit of a bad rep. I think it's lovely. It's got a great texture, lovely flavour. It's quite irony, almost spinachy, but it's got different texture. All you need to do, you've got lovely crisp leaves like this. Just cut the stalk out of the centre. And down the middle. And keep it as it is. You don't need to break it all down. You can keep it into nice long pieces. It's a winter vegetable and it gives a little bit of vibrancy for that time of year. So that's literally all we need to do with this. So that's ready to blanch when we're finishing the dish later on. So I'm all set up to finish the main course now. So I've got a pan on here to caramelise and slow cook the sprouts. A pan on to warm the puree. Some water coming up to the boil, which I'm going to blanch the kale in later on. Then a non-stick frying pan. I'm just going to caramelise and crisp up that gnocchi. So first of all, some butter into the pan for the sprouts. Now sprouts are another underrated ingredient. Just boiled, I think the flavour is terrible. It's really bitter, quite insipid. I think you need to confit them and get some colour on them. So we've cut them in half, and a bit like the onions, I'm going to put them flat side down and just build up some colour. Let that butter go nut brown. So none of these are going to be piled up. They're nicely laid out. The butter's going to be about halfway up. So just cooking nicely. They're not too crowded in either. So to that I'm going to add some rosemary as the aromat. It's going to work lovely with that gnocchi, perfect with a parsnip as well. The butter's going to suck up that rosemary and then infuse into the sprouts. So a little bit of salt now. You can season it more later, but adding layers of seasoning. As chefs, we always talk about layers of seasoning, so season throughout. So the frying of this should take about 2 to 3 minutes to get the colour that you want. And then we're just going to put it on a low heat, and then it's going to take about 3 or 4 minutes more to cook. It's going to have a tiny little bit of bite to it, but slightly soft as well on the outside. So I've just turned that temperature up slightly. You can see it's starting to get a lovely colour on it, but I want it a little bit more than that. Okay, so check the sprouts now, getting a lovely golden colour. Drop them back over. That's the kind of colour we're looking for. So I'm going to turn it down and just let them finish off nice and gently. Their own moisture within the sprouts is going to steam them within, and that's going to finish them off. We don't need to add any water to this. So I've just moved the sprouts to the back there on a really low heat. Don't really have to worry about them. They're not going to colour anymore. They're just going to finish off cooking gently. Now the gnocchi, sometimes you boil gnocchi and then finish it in a sauce, but this I'm just going to pan fry it in some nice foaming butter. So warm pan, getting plenty of surface area in the pan. We're not going to overfill it. If you've got a smaller pan, do it in 2 batches, but if you've got one this size, that's perfect. If you overfill the pan, they can start to break up. We want to keep them individual, flip them, get a nice colour on them. So foaming butter, we don't want it going nut brown just yet. We want to build that up when we've got the gnocchi in there. So very gently. I'm going to put them in the forked side down first. And a little tip, if you start at the top, go either clockwise or anti-clockwise. You know which ones you've put in first, so you know which way to turn them. A tiny little shake, just make sure they're not sticking. So they're going to take in total 2 to 3 minutes to cook. Generally a little bit longer on the first side, around 2 minutes, then 1 minute on the other side. Turn the heat down if it is just going a little bit too brown, but this is the perfect sort of temperature. Butter's going slightly golden, it's not burning. So whilst I'm waiting for this gnocchi, I'm just going to start warming the parsnip puree. See how it hasn't got a skin because we've put that cling film on. turn that down, and we're just going to heat that nice and gently. Plenty of stir in, make sure the pan's nice and clean and it's not catching on the bottom. And now back to the gnocchi. So from the top where I started, I'm going to flip them over. See, they've got that beautiful golden colour, a nice crisp. So I'm just going to drop that heat right down. Let them finish with the residual heat of the pan. Okay, the puree should still be lovely and silky, coming up to temperature now. It's time to remove the gnocchi from the pan. So just have a warm plate ready and just very carefully onto the plate. So gnocchi's just come out. Parsnip puree is nice and warm now, and then the sprouts feel about ready. So as everything's coming together, it's time just to finish the kale. So we've got some boiling salted water. Kale straight in, all together. It will look a lot, but it does wilt down. So just shake that in. Bring that back up to the bowl nice and quickly. So we're keeping it fresh and crunchy, nice and vibrant and green. It's going to take about 45 seconds to a minute to cook. It always takes a little bit longer than spinach, it is a little bit more fibrous, but you don't want to overcook it. It goes a bit sloppy, the texture is not very pleasant. So now the kale's ready. Just going to drop the heat off, stop the boiling. Drain off all the excess liquid. When you squeeze it, your fingers shouldn't go through it, shouldn't turn to mush. Then it just needs a little bit of seasoning, some sea salt, and now we're ready to plate. So parsnip puree does tend to dry out quite quickly. It does take a lot of liquid, so if you need to, if it is thickening up, just add a little bit of water that you've used from the kale, just to make sure it's nice and silky again. So parsnip puree first on the plate. So don't be shy with this. So in the middle and spoon directly down. And then flood the plate. So now with the gnocchi, just take your time to build this around. The gnocchi is quite a rustic dish, but you can take the time just to make this look a little bit more pretty. So leaving little gaps, that's where we're going to put the sprouts. Use it all up, a bit more in the middle. Now the sprouts, see I've got that lovely glaze on them, really nice colour. This is what's going to add a nice bit of bite and texture to the dish. Your puree is quite soft, your gnocchi crispy but soft as well. This is going to add that little bit of bite. So last to go on the plate, the kale. Again, don't be shy with this. Kale's a really nice element to this dish. So there's the main course. Truffled gnocchi, parsnip puree, beautifully confit sprouts and a wilted kale. So I absolutely love wine. I've actually got a podcast called The Nightcap where we drink great wines and talk about chef stories. Now this wine, the Dolcetto d'Alba We've chosen this to go with your vegetarian meal. Really elegant wine, got lots of red fruit, blueberries, lovely crunching tannies. And we've chosen it because it comes from the Piedmont region of Italy, which is where truffles are from. So it's perfect to go with that gnocchi, and it's not going to overpower it. Beautiful wine that's going to pair perfectly with that whole menu. Now you've finished the main course, it's time for the star of the show, the dessert. So for dessert, it's just a matter of bringing it all together. So we've got this beautiful cheesecake that's been slow cooked with the Tunworth in there. So it kind of replicates the texture of Tunworth, which is very like camembert. There's a little bit in there, so it's not too strong. So it's like a classic cheesecake texture. So for the crumb of the cheesecake, we've got this lovely shortbread crumb to give it some texture rather than having the base on the bottom. Then to go with that and freshen it up, quince puree. So quince, which are always in season in winter, cooked down with some apple, a little bit of orange juice. So it's really fresh, nice and sweet, and it's just going to cut right through that cheesecake. So cheesecake is delicate. So from the fridge, lift it up and place it on your plate. A nice generous spoon of the quince puree. And finish off with a shortbread crumb. So this is a shortbread that's not been brought into a pastry. So whilst it's still a crumb, we bake it. So it's a lovely texture, nice and crumbly. And there we go, Tunworth cheesecake, quince puree, and a lovely crispy shortbread crumb.
Paul Foster, what is your What is your desert island crisp?
So it has to be salt and vinegar, but the best one is Walker's Max salt and vinegar, the crinkle cut.
What is your death row meal?
So my death row meal is just a smorgasbord of charcuterie, pickles, olives, pork pie, just something that's going to take me a long time to eat before I get executed.
If you had a dinner party and you got to invite 3 dinner party guests, dead or alive, who would you pick?
So if I had a dinner party, I'd invite Marco Pierre White because he's a legend, Nico, who's one of my favourite chefs, so Nico Ladinis, and then just to mix things up, Katie Hopkins.
What is your favourite restaurant in the world?
My favourite restaurant in the world is the French Laundry. I love their philosophy, I love their food, I love everything about it, it's my mecca.
What is your worst kitchen injury?
My worst kitchen injury, I was prepping some carrots when I was at college with a small knife, and I put the knife all the way through my hand in between and it come out the other side. And I had to have it glued together at hospital. I hope you've enjoyed everything. Thank you for cooking along with me. I hope you've picked up some great skills that you can carry on and have a great evening.